In this unit, we will be talking about supply and demand. This will be our last lesson in the economics category. After this lesson, you'll be able to explain the nature of supply and demand and also the factors that affect supply and demand. Okay, before we begin, let me tell you a little story that happened last year. Many of you know about Apple's iPhone 11. Before this was released, excitement had been building for months and months to see what kind of new features Apple would release with its new iPhone. Customers pre-ordered the phone before it was even available and lined up outside of the stores the night before it was released. So people basically camped out of Apple stores all across the country, and there were giant lines in anticipation of the iPhone 11. And you can see that here in this story in CNBC. After a couple weeks since releasing the new iPhone, there was a little bit of a shortage because the demand was so high. So these people called scalpers, who are people who buy products or usually tickets for games and resell the tickets or products for as much as twice as their original selling price. And this happened after the iPhone 11 was released. Scalpers came in, bought the phones, and then resold them to people at twice their original selling price. What the company did is they actually increased production to try to keep up with demand and rushed more phones into stores as soon as they could. But after a while, the lines of customers disappeared. Now, today, it's really easy to get an iPhone, and scalpers cannot resell one even if they tried. This is actually all a part of supply and demand. What's in 1 minute might be out the next. This doesn't just affect business, it also has an impact on you. What if you wanted to buy the phone, but every store and website was sold out? This means there was a demand, but no supply. On the other hand, what would happen or what has happened since the company increased production and plenty of phones became available? Now there's a supply, but demand is decreasing. Let's look at another example that has happened more recently. Early on in the pandemic, there was one household item that a lot of people could not have access to. I'm sure you can guess what this was. Toilet paper. Toilet paper became a coveted item in late March when many cities and states across the country issued shelter-in-place orders in response to the pandemic. Nearly half of all grocery stores in the United States were out of stock of toilet paper during April. When the sudden increase in demand for toilet paper, largely fueled by panic buying and hoarding suppliers, were unable to keep up. To adjust, many suppliers started supplying more and more toilet paper. According to some toilet paper brands, people who stay home use about 40% more toilet paper than usual. So this kind of makes sense. However, once this will be completely over, and to some extent, people have stopped panic buying, although with the rise in cases across the country, people are beginning to do the same thing. But once this is all over, once the pandemic is over, what do you think will happen? There will likely be a large surplus of toilet paper, meaning there will be so much toilet paper, especially in the lines of the toilet paper section, that people will have toilet paper for 2 to 3 months. Then producers will have to curtail production, meaning they'll have to stop producing as much as they are now. This is all about supply and demand. It's important that you understand when we're talking about supply and demand, it's important that you understand that the ultimate goal is to match supply with demand. You can get the new iPhone you want, and the company can sell all of the phones it makes, for example. So let's talk just about demand. You see coffee shops in just about every town you visit, especially if you go to Scottsbluff or Gering. You might pass multiple coffee shops driving through town. There might even be one in your favorite stores, such as Target or Safeway. You might visit these shops frequently with friends or to work on homework or something like that. There are even more coffee shops that I haven't put on this slide, which include Cappuccino and Company, The Daily Grind, O Street Nutrition, The Mixing Bowl, etc. I think you get the point. There are a lot of coffee shops around the area. But why do you think coffee shops are so popular? Well, there's a demand for the products, which are usually coffee, tea, baked goods, smoothies, etc. Consumers, aka you, are ready to buy at a particular price at a particular time. Many customers are willing to pay the price to enjoy specialty coffee in the atmosphere of a coffee shop. But for demand to exist, there has to be a desire for a good or service. People driving to work in the mornings might have desire for coffee. For demand to exist, there also has to be buying power, which, when I say buying power, here's an example. If I start a coffee shop and I order specialty coffee that costs around $6 a cup, but if you, the consumer or customer, does not have any money to pay for it, I won't sell any cups of coffee. So there must also be customers willing to give up some buying power, which means paying for the coffee means you won't be able to buy something else. So you might buy a $4 grande latte, but not be able to go to Burger King later and buy a Whopper. If customers aren't willing to give up some buying power in exchange for coffee, then there is no demand. So if a Whopper meal at Burger King has more value for you than my coffee, then the demand for the coffee does not exist. The law of demand states that the quantity of a good or service that consumers will buy varies inversely with the price of the good or service. So what does inversely mean? Inversely, and maybe you've learned this in your math classes, means that while one thing increases, so while price increases, the other thing decreases, the quantity demanded. So price and quantity have a negative relationship. So as the price of, let's say, toilet paper increases, then I'm not going to demand as much. So the quantity over here that I will demand will be less. Let's look at an example. Also, when you think of prices and quantity when it comes to demand, understand that they have an inverse relationship. That's very important that you remember that consumers will usually buy more at lower prices and less at higher prices. So an example would be, how many grande frappuccinos would you buy if they were $8 each at Starbucks? How many would you buy at Scooters? So you would probably buy more at Scooters since their price is less, only $3. Think for a second, are there other products you would not purchase if the prices were higher? Your response might be something like clothes, jewelry, shoes, energy drinks, or phones. So what kind of relationship do price and quantity have when we are talking about demand? I hope that you said inverse.